I'm joined by former intelligence officers Bob Ayres and Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer. Good morning, or I should say good afternoon to you both. And I suppose I'll start with you, Bob. Is this going to work?
Well, there's really two questions you have to ask. One is, will somebody avail themselves of the opportunity to pass information? And the second question is, does the information they pass have any utility? The first question is answerable by thinking that if this is targeted toward the Russians, it's targeted toward the Russians that are engaged along the front lines and engaged in combat. Getting information from somebody who lives in Vladivostok is interesting but irrelevant. So if you're targeting soldiers, what's the likelihood they will actually respond? Well, they've been told if they retreat, they're going to be shot. They've been told if they surrender and they come back to back to Russia, they're going to spend 10 years in the jail. If they continue to fight, they're probably going to die. So they're being given a option of victory or death. Now, assuming they do decide to talk, which is interesting, the question then becomes, what is the value of the information they provide? If you're targeting people up in the area of combat, you're going to get tactical intelligence, things like what's your unit name, what's your unit number, when's the last time you got fed, where'd you come from. These are all bits of information for building an order of battle picture of the enemy. But the Ukrainians don't need an order of battle picture. They've been engaged with these guys now for a year. They know who they are. They know where they are. They know how they fight. So the question becomes then, what's the utility of this CIA video? And that really becomes an interesting question because I don't see much utility in it.
Yeah. And Tony, I'm interested in your view on this video as to whether it'll work. And indeed, if it does work, what will be the value, as Bob has been talking about there, of the information that comes forward?
It's not going to work. The CIA has tried this before. I've been through their internal CIA vetting training for assets, and the CIA has gotten its lunch eaten a number of times by the Russians on this very issue. The moment this came out, the Russians started planning their counterintelligence program to start feeding information into it. Everything Bob just said, I agree with. He went through all the categories, and the Russians did too. And so what's going to happen now is much what happened in the 70s and 80s with Cuba. Cuba was a huge target of the CIA. The Cuban intelligence service, coached and mentored by the Russians, was able to essentially establish full control of every path forward in the CIA. So I'm very skeptical. I think some contractor at Langley got paid a lot of money to come up with this. And and then plus the other thing, Russia's winning right now. We just learned today that they're doing well. Again, I don't dispute what Bob's saying about the conditions, but for the most part, you're not going to find anybody at the high level where you need to get strategic information from the leadership about plans and intentions. All the other tactical stuff, as Bob said, they've got that. You need intentions at this point. This is not the way to get to intentions of what the Russians are doing.
And I suppose, Tony, you both are experts in this field. I'm not, but I had an idea in my head that espionage is a bit like gathering all the little bits together and putting it together like a jigsaw puzzle and getting a picture of what's going on. But what would you judge to be the most important factor in pushing somebody and motivating a Russian person to come forward with information?
The record is the Russians are most motivated by cash, being able to buy people off. The whole idea of nationalism did not work well. Again, I recruited Russians. This is not something obtuse or alien to me. During the end of the Cold War especially, we were able to bring a number in. When Berlin fell, we had a number of things going on. The chief of station there was a friend of mine. They were rolling Russians in, but the motivation has to be correct. Again, when you're having a war where they're winning, and for the most part, Vladimir Putin's approval rate is high, the approach they're making where, you must feel bad about what you're doing, is just simply not going to work. And again, I think that this will only help the Russians establish counterintelligence feed information and pass into the CIA.
Yeah, and we're watching photographs of your president there with Vladimir Zelensky, who spoke with the G7 leaders this morning. Bob, tell me, do the CIA really think that this is going to bring them information, or is it an attempt to try and stir up trouble in Russia? I mean, Is this something that you think is genuine, or is it just there to rattle the Russians?
If it's a legitimate attempt to stir up trouble in Russia, then I think the CIA is deluding themselves. I agree with our other guests that this is probably the product of a contractor who was paid a lot of money to come up with a video. I guess the way I would describe what we're seeing in front of us is, never confuse activity with achievement. And this video is not going to accomplish anything. It'll make somebody happy that they put it out, and they'll pat themselves on the back, but it's going to ultimately be valueless.
Yeah. And just briefly from both of you, is this something, do you think that the CIA would have shared this information or video with their colleagues in the international community, the Five Eyes community, before they sent it out? Or is it something that they just put out themselves? Tony, I'll come to you first.
Look, the CIA is very much integrated with the Five Eyes, but something like this, this has a propaganda value which goes beyond intelligence collection. As Bob just said, I agree with his assessment. I don't necessarily know if they shared it or not. I think this may have been something that they mentioned in a meeting saying, oh, by the way, we're going to do this. If it was coordinated, I think you would have seen other Five Eye nations doing something to support it. I don't see an overall global coordinated effort. So that tells me that, yeah, they maybe were notified, but they weren't necessarily either on board or directly in support of the video. So again, I just don't see the value of this other than some contractor getting paid a lot of money to develop it.
Yeah. Yeah. And Bob, would you agree with this assessment from Tony? Bob?
I think if the CIA would have shown this video to the other Five Eyes membership, they would have been discouraged from playing it. They would have been told, well, that's really nice, but we don't see the purpose in this. What are you trying to accomplish? They would have been critiqued by professional intelligence officers, and the results of that critique would have been don't show this darn thing.